podcast, Jamie. So I'm so excited. We have Jamie Scridgemour. Is it Scridgemour? I know
Scrimgeour.
you just told me that.
Scrimgeour.
Scrimgeour.
It's all
Oh my
good.
gosh. I do that
Scrimgeour.
all. I even like Googled it right before we got into our interview and like I still just forgot. Like I don't know what it is, like anxiety or
It's
what.
all good.
But I'm yeah. But I'm
All
super excited
good.
to have you on the podcast today. So yeah. So we are going to learn today on the podcast how to be a kick-ass stepmom. So Jamie, welcome to the podcast. Do you
Thank you.
want to share a little bit about yourself and why you started the Kick-Ass Stepmom program?
Yeah. Well, I feel so weird about that name. I was like, I wonder what people think. But, when I first started the whole platform and, really kind of my passion and my need ended up turning into basically my business, right? I started thinking about what do I want for myself and what do I want for the stepmoms who follow me, for the people in my world. And it always came back to I want them to live a kick-ass life and I want to live a kick-ass life. So that's kind of where that came from. And it's all about, just thriving amongst the tough stuff. Because I think, whether you're a stepmom or whether you're a single mom or you're divorced, like whatever, like this was not in any of our plans. This was not, we didn't
Right.
like sit around as children thinking about our divorce or thinking about hooking up with someone with kids and co-parenting. So there's just a lot of tough stuff for everyone. And I think it's just really important to focus on strategies to thrive and strategies to be able to still feel happy and content and fulfilled amidst all of the tough stuff that comes with it. But yeah, the way this whole started is, I was 26. I started dating my husband. He's 13 years older than me. So it was like his stereotypical rebound relationship post-divorce with the young girl. And he had 3 kids. And it was a whirlwind, really. We were just in love right away. And I was just all in with him from the beginning. And we had we dated really quickly. We got married really quickly. We ended up having a baby really quickly. And, everyone in my life, well, obviously there was judgment. People like, what are they doing? Like, what's going on here? And I'm so glad I didn't listen. And I'm so glad I didn't really think about it too much because it was really crazy. It was insane. And I think if I really would have thought about it too much, I would have been like, oh, I don't know about this. But so I have a background in psychology, used to work in child protection. My parents were divorced. So I was pretty well versed in the co-parenting, working with kids, all the things. And so I thought it was going to be fine, right? I thought I was going to be really good at the stepmom thing. And yeah, it turns out it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And I ended up going to the internet for support one night and just looking for support. I was crying in the bathroom. I had moved into the house that they had lived in before. So, her junk drawers were my now junk drawers. I was not the house I thought I was going to live in. Didn't like the decor. Like, it was just like not what I wanted for my life, what I had thought. And I was just really struggling. And there wasn't a lot of support for stepmoms. There was a lot of ex-wife bashing. There was a lot of negativity.
Yeah.
There was a lot of really high conflict forums. And then nothing else. I didn't want to fight with the ex. I didn't want to sit there and spend my night in this like toxic chat room. Like I was just like, could someone tell me how to feel better? And so, over the next few years, I really did a lot of work on myself. I did a lot of work on my marriage. I dove into personal development and I ended up starting a blog. And, long story short, or long story long at this point, I ended up like connecting with so many stepmoms and started working with stepmoms. And then I started my membership for stepmoms and the podcast. And it's just really turned into this platform that there's stepmoms from all over the world in my community, like 30 countries around the world in the membership. It's wild because even still, there's not a lot of support out there for stepmoms. Like there's a lot of negativity and not a lot of support.
Yeah. Well, I had never thought about stepmom. I don't know what that is.
Cool.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. Well, no, so I'm a mom support page. I started my account 3 years ago, and I just saw there was like a need for moms who are struggling in new motherhood, and postpartum, maybe struggling with postpartum anxiety or depression. So I saw a need there, where there really wasn't anything at the time that was kind of filling that. And I've never thought of the support that stepmoms need until I connected with your account. And I was like, I bet
Mm.
there are so many women. I mean, over 50% of marriages end up in divorce. And I'm assuming, most of those people end up getting remarried. So that's a dynamic that a lot of people are affected by it. I grew up with
Mm-hmm.
divorced parents as well. And my dad got remarried. So this happened when I was 10. He got remarried that same year. So I've had that stepmom child relationship, and so I understand like the dynamic, and it is very negative. It can feel very negative. And so being someone going into that, with the best of intentions, I mean, it seems very challenging. So I'm sure that there's a lot of women who have found a lot of value in what you're sharing and your coaching programs. So how, I know that you created these programs. How did you just base them off of your own personal experience and kind of where, maybe you did something that you wish you would have done differently? Or
Mm-hmm.
how did you kind of gather that data?
Well, yeah, because I've been working with stepmoms and communicating with stepmoms just before I ended up creating this program. And what I really realized is that there is no one size fits all approach. So what's going to work for a stepmom in this family is not going to work for a stepmom in the other family, right? Because there's so many contributing factors. So the relationship with the ex, how is the ex dealing with the new stepmom coming into the role? Like some exes are like, oh my gosh, can I have some help? This is amazing. Like, let's be a team. Let's, really
Yeah.
co-parent together. Other ones are like, don't you even buy my daughter lunch? Like there's just
Mm,
like so many different
yeah.
dynamics. How your stepkids have dealt with the divorce, your relationship with your partner, what you want as a stepmom. So when I created my programs, I didn't want there to be this one size fits all approach. So it really is this step-by-step plan for you to be the expert on your own step family life. So prompts and questions and things you need to consider, conversations to have with your partner, what defining what your role is going to be, and diving into boundaries, diving into what disengaging could look like for you when what you're doing isn't working. So it really does
Yeah.
depend on the person, and it's about creating a plan that works for you and your step family dynamic, because there's so many just like rules and expectations. A stepmom should do this or a stepmom shouldn't do that, and none of that is really true. It's what works for you and your family, right? So it's
Yeah.
about really empowering people to do their own work and answer their own questions. So I created a framework that had worked with me and had really transformed my step family life. And then I had shared it with all of my coaching clients, and I was booking out and I was getting really busy. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this step-by-step program so that people can do this on their own at their own time. And sometimes that's just what you want to do,
Mm.
right?
Yeah. I love that so much. Yeah, I really like that, having that individual approach, because yeah, it's so true. Like, we're all unique individuals. We all have different experiences. Our kids have different experiences. Maybe they're at different ages. And I'm sure, making assumptions here that like how a child responds to a stepmom might be different when they're 3 versus when they're a teenager and you're going through those like tough teenage years. And so having that individual approach. What was the approach that you took, in your own blended family? Was there a lot of high conflict, or how did you navigate that, just kind of once you got married to your husband, and then moving into the house that he had with his ex?
No, yeah, I'm still here, still in the house. Okay, how did I approach it? Well, I
Oh,
think
okay.
with yeah, we're
Yeah.
still here. Um,
Wow.
okay, so with the kids, it was really I was all about taking
Yeah.
my cues from them, because I remember things that my dad's girlfriends had done that had been really triggering for me when my parents divorced. He never got remarried, but he
Mm,
had a
mhm.
series of girlfriends who would come in, and I learned a lot of things not to
Yeah.
do from them. It was like when divorce wasn't as common. But so it was really about taking my cues from them and developing that relationship before I stepped into that parenting role. So I have 3 different stepkids right now. They're so 21, 19, going to be 20, and then 17. But I came when, the youngest was 5. So I have a very different relationship with all 3 of those kids. So Madison was 10 when I came. So she was a little more standoffish. I've never been, I would say, a mother to her and a motherly role to her. I've always been more of just like a mentor. We go shopping together. I'll be like, hey, just something to consider here. And I don't think I've ever gotten her in trouble for anything. Right. It's just that's the kind of relationship we have. She's also very good. She don't get her in trouble very often. But then for example, my stepson who was 5 when I came, he's my baby, right? Like even still, he is just literally, I'm very much a motherly figure to him. I would say he sees me as the most like a parent than any of the other kids. So it's really individual based on those kids and based on where they're at. But, when it came to the ex, I think there was just a lot of healing and a lot of growth that needed to happen, I think, on both of our parts. So she had left the marriage. And, when looking back, what I really realized is empathy is so key in all of these situations, because there was part of me when she would be struggling with certain things, I'd be like, well, she left. Like, what did she expect? Well, no one knows what something's going to feel like. So even though maybe that marriage isn't healthy or marriage isn't something she wants, it would be very hard to see her ex move on with a younger woman who's come in and taking on this role with the kids, right? Like I can look at that now from this perspective and say, wow, that would make me crazy. I would probably not show up I would be like, not okay, right? I would have had a lot of therapy to go through in order to deal with that. And so I think she was going through that. I was going through all of this judgment and insecurity that I felt about my ability to even show up. So I think we were both kind of judging each other, both kind of standoffish from each other, and just going through our own healing. And I think that's really important to be able to put yourself in their perspective and look and be like, wow, this must be really hard for her. This must be really hard for her. I think as women, we need to do that more often in so many ways.
Yeah. I think that's key too, is just like that empathy and trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So it's kind of similar with my parents as well. Like, my parents got divorced when I was 10. They'd been married for over 20 years. My dad moved on very quickly, married a younger woman, actually 13 years younger than him.
Oh.
And, but she had 3 kids of her own as well that were about my age, me and my siblings' ages. So there was that, kind of different dynamic. And I think, this was over 20 years ago. So I think we have so much more information now than what we did then, which is awesome. And I think it's only going to help with blended families. So how long did it take, would you say, or what type of like boundaries did you have to set kind of going into that environment with an ex who maybe, was going through her own things, her own grieving process or whatever, and kind of struggling there? Were there any types of boundaries that you put? Did you talk to the ex? What do you recommend there for women that are kind of in that kind of weird situation?
Yeah, it really depends on what works for you, right? I think a mistake a lot of stepmoms make is we go all in because, we're women and we feel our value in our nature is to be caregivers and to care for our families and to support everyone and show up for everyone, like all the things. And it can be really hard when you're a stepmom, right? Because you go all in and then especially if you're a childless stepmom, like I didn't have kids before, so I didn't realize how much is a thankless job. Like there's no parade for doing the dishes, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of stepmoms go all in and are doing all the things for everyone, taking over stuff in the home. He's like, no, it's okay. I got it. Doing the dishes, doing the laundry, doing all of the mom jobs, quote unquote. And then you get to the point where you're resentful, you're overwhelmed. And I tell this story a lot, but my husband and I got in an argument one night, and this is, a year and a half in, because I was communicating with the ex. Her and I were going back and forth. I was taking care of everything. And because I wanted that control, right? And I wanted to prove myself. So it was really about me and my own insecurities and that kind of stuff when I look back. And I said, I gave up everything for you guys. And like, I used to do yoga. I used to go to the bookstores. I used to go to coffee. I used to do all these things. And he says to me, he said, no one asked you to do that. You did that. And so that's a mistake that a lot of stepmoms make, right? We think we're going to come in and solve their problems. We have this idea of what this stepmom role is going to look like. We have this fantasy when we forget that the best, like marrying my husband was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life. It symbolizes one of the worst things that has happened to the kids and to the ex, right? So we all have different stuff going on. So it's very easy to take offense to how someone's reacting to you showing up in this role when they're still in their own grieving period. So when it came to my role with the ex, we would go back and forth and we would talk, but there are times we would get into it, right? We would have, conversation. We'd have arguments over the $15 volleyball expense and things like that. But then on the flip side, we would be able to correspond about the kids. So she would call me and be like, "Hey, I know you went to school for this. Can you tell me what do you think we should do for that?" So we've always had this relationship that ebbed and flowed based on where we're at. And I think now looking back, we can both say, yeah, we've had wine together. We've been at hockey tournaments together. We've had words. We've, been through all of the emotions, I think, of the last, 12 years together. And there's been different phases. But when it comes to boundaries and disengaging, I think you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing working? Right? Because we can get so caught up in how we think it should be, what this role should look like, how we should be treated, how someone should see us. And so we're like, we're a parent, treat me like a parent, or I need to be involved in this. I need to be involved in that. And you have to stop and ask yourself, is what I'm doing working? Is it making things better here, or is it making things worse? Is it impacting my ability to show up as my best? Or is it leaving me feeling depleted and then I can't even show up as a good stepmom because I'm just so triggered all the time? So just getting those are the questions that I always recommend people ask themselves throughout their stepmom experience or career, because what works when the kids are 5 does not work when they're 15, right? So I had to reevaluate my step parenting approach based on where the kids are at as well.
Yeah. I could see how that could get so complicated, because when you're some mom, you're a person, you have feelings, you're going into this marriage, you have certain expectations. And like you said, these kids and their mom, this might be the hardest time of their life, seeing another woman come into their dad's life, and, no one wants to replace mom. I know that's kind of how I felt as a child, was oh, this woman's coming in and almost replacing my mom. And it was different because the custody schedule my parents had was we only saw my dad every other weekend. So I almost never saw my dad. And he was a very present father, but it was just the custody schedule was more normal back then. Now a lot of people do 50-50. So then I felt as a child, oh, he has this new family. And so that was really difficult. And I just think back to him, I'm just my poor stepmom. Back when she first married my dad, I feel so bad because that was an adult. I can look back and I, can comprehend things better, but I'm just we treated her so poorly. But it was really just coming from a place of our own pain,
Have you ever, are they still together?
No, they're not. They've been divorced now for 10 years. And I
was you should message her. You should tell her that.
But I should. You know what? I actually should, because I did message her on Facebook a little while ago for some photos. And I think all is good now. We're adults. And so I actually would be fine. And maybe I will message her and just be hey, I'm sorry, that we treated you so poorly all those years. We probably made, but it really was just coming from a place of pain. And I don't think anyone knew how to deal with it. We weren't in, that type of therapy. And, she's just kind of thrown into this. And her ex never remarried. Well, at least when my parents were, or my dad and stepmom were together, he never remarried. So it was just a kind of a weird dynamic, but it's just very complicated. It's really hard for everyone involved. What would you recommend? Let's say that you do have there is a high conflict ex, or a high conflict kids. I was a high conflict kid, unfortunately.
Yeah, me too.
But how would you best recommend? Yeah, how would you best recommend, a stepmom to handle that?
Well, I think when you're dealing with a high conflict kid, the other parent, so the dad or mom, whatever type of relationship you're in, they need to be saying, you don't have to like her, but you're going to treat her with respect. And I think that's where a lot of parents go wrong, because they're trying to tiptoe around their kids, make sure their kids are happy with this new adjustment and all that stuff. And they'll turn a bit of a blind eye to the disrespect. And if it's tolerated, it'll be continued. So I think giving kids permission not to like you, or permission not to like the idea of you, or to even say to them like, look, this is hard. I don't know what I'm doing. This is new for me too. And just being very vulnerable and open. But if you have a high conflict kid who wants nothing to do with you, or who is constantly being disrespectful, or it makes it very clear, like they're not interested in this situation. I think it's really powerful just to disengage, right? And focus on your marriage, focus on, building that relationship with them, and getting to know them, if they're open, on a level that isn't about a parent. It's about, hey, like I was a stranger, we were strangers and now we're supposed to be family. It's kind of a lot of pressure, right? So just kind of getting to know them on that level.
Right.
But if they don't want to, there's really nothing you can do about it. And that's where it's really interesting. Like I talk a lot about the double standards for stepmoms. And so, or just like the mixed messages in society. So, society's saying to stepmoms, you need to love these kids like they're your own. There's a lot of stepkids who are literally making their stepmoms' lives a living hell. And stepmoms have anxiety every time that they come into the house. Right. And, I have been that stepmom who feels like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home, who has anxiety before certain things with my stepkids. I also love it's a very complicated situation, but to say to this woman, she needs to love them like they're her own, leads to a lot of guilt. Right? Because she's like, I actually want to throw up before they come because it's so high conflict. So there's a lot of guilt there. But in the same note, stepmoms are being told they need to love their stepkids like they're their own. And that's the goal. Obviously, that's what everyone wants. Stepkids are said, you don't have to listen to her. She's not your mom. So just the mixed messages, right? No one's saying you need to love her like she's your mom. Which they shouldn't. She's not their mom, but there's there's no messages there. So it's kind of like this really screwed up dynamic in society where there's just a lot of double standards.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. How does a stepmom kind of deal with that?
Yeah, I don't know. It really depends on the situation.
I know it's different for everyone, but I don't know if you could give like one tip for, like if you feel like, okay, I feel like throwing up when the kids are coming over, they're just disengaging. Yeah.
Yeah. Disengaging,
and just making yourself like available, like if they want.
Yeah. Disengaging out of love. I think there's a lot of bad information online about stepmoms disengaging, and it's like, not your kid, not your problem. Like, don't worry about it. Well, it is very much your problem because you're in the same home. They're your partner's kids. You're like, there's a lot of reasons why it is not. It is your problem. And so I think disengaging with the intent of being able to reconnect when it's right, as opposed to being like, screw this, I'm not having anything to do with, you know what I mean? Like there's a different way to take that step back, almost with love and kind of hope for how you guys can rebuild in the future. But the big thing I say to stepmoms all the time is, and this sounds so corny, moms hear it all the time too, but you have to be taking care of yourself. Because if you are not, doing the work on yourself, if you're not moving your body, eating healthy, have a community, find a community of like-minded people, like all of those things, you are going to be far more triggered by all of the things that are going on in your stepfamily life. So it's like, what can you do to make sure that you're showing up as your best? So that you have that capacity, you have the bandwidth to deal. But that would be the big thing. Like if your relationships are going sour with the ex or with the kids, it's like, okay, just lean into yourself, lean into your marriage and do the work there on the things that you can control. And it will help everything else kind of fall into place.
Yeah. Do you recommend stepmoms or, I mean, I guess this kind of also applies to stepdads. I mean, thinking about my own situation, my mom also got remarried as well, but the dynamic was different with my stepdad. There was almost like not this like war, I want to say. in air quotes war between like my stepdad and my dad. Like it seemed like all was good there. But with my
Well,
mom and my
because women have
stepmom,
been,
it was like,
yeah. Think about
yeah.
that though.
But it's
Women
like,
are pit against
why?
each other.
Yeah.
Women are pit against
Yeah.
each other. We've been fighting for the man like since the beginning, you know, like
Yeah.
if you really, it's stepdads are glorified. It's really interesting. So
Yeah.
a man
That's very
takes
true.
on
Yeah.
someone with kids and it's like, oh my God, what a great guy. He's so stepping up. A stepmom comes in and she's like, oh, she's not respecting the mom. She's trying to take over. She resents the kids from being around, right? So there's already that narrative. And it's like patriarchy is like the whole thing, right? You could die. That could be a whole other podcast episode there. So I think it can be a little bit different in terms of just the way that they're viewed.
Yeah. I've actually never thought of it that way. How different it is with stepmoms versus stepdads. But my question, going back to what my question was before I got distracted. So do you recommend like stepmoms or stepdads kind of being the disciplinary or coming in, maybe not right away, but eventually? Is that kind of the goal, or is the goal always to kind of take that back seat? Can we talk about that, how that dynamic can change?
Yeah. Well, I think before you do any disciplining, you have to have that relationship and that trust. Right. And so it comes back to what we were talking about before, the respect piece. So you need to treat someone with respect, period. And that other parent needs to make sure that that's being enforced. Like it's not okay to be mean. And the thing is you got to teach your kids. There's gonna be hard relationships. There's gonna be people in your life you don't like. There's gonna be situations you don't want to be in. You can't be a little jerk, right? You just can't. This is like life skills 101, right? But I think with stepmoms, it's really the only area of motherhood where it's like disrespect is almost normalized. But that really needs to be just the solid foundation. But then in terms of the stepmom providing direction and providing discipline and things like that, it's so annoying that I keep saying this, but it really does depend on the situation and your relationship with the kids. So for example, I started providing direction and discipline. Like I would swipe an iPad pretty quick. Like when I first came in, Darren was working late nights. I was home with all the kids, and just like a babysitter would have, or an aunt or anyone in that caregiving role, I kind of had to step in and do that. But the kids were receptive to that, and Darren had my back. If your partner doesn't have your back too, don't even, that it makes it very, very challenging. But then, as the kids got older, I took a step back on that. So Darren has the big conversations. He does that. So
I see.
He takes the lead on that even still, because teenagers are far more forgiving of their real parents than their step parents. So if I would have come in at that age, I don't think it would have been very different.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's crazy. So, one other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this kind of goes to like the double standards of like stepmoms and stepdads, was like this narrative of stepmoms in media. So I was watching Parent Trap with my girls the other night. Love that movie. But
good.
In that movie, I mean, yeah, the dad is is engaged to another woman. And granted, I mean, she doesn't seem like the best.
She sucked.
But I think that's just like, right. But like, that's just an example of like stepmoms or another woman coming into a family. Like, I feel like that's very common, also Cinderella, like Hansel and Gretel, I'm sure that there's a lot more I can't think of right now. But I wonder kind of how that has subconsciously affected people and like their assumptions about stepmoms before they even give someone a chance.
Oh, totally. Like there's always this assumption. So even when you meet someone for the first time, you're just like, oh, say you're at the hockey arena, okay? And they'd be like, oh, who are you watching? Like, oh, that's my stepson out there, number 16, right? Oh, your stepmom. Yeah. So you're not his real mom. No, I'm stepmom. So how's the ex? How do you get along with the ex? Or so how's things with your stepkids? Like, I mean, I just met you. Right? So there's just this assumption that there's a story or there's drama or there's negativity. And then when you say that you get along or you say that things are good, they're like, oh, and it's almost like a shock. It kind of makes people feel uncomfortable because the narrative has been so negative for so long. And yeah, like ask 10 people what they first think of when they hear the word stepmom. I bet you most of it's negative, unless they've had a really great
Yeah.
stepmom in their life. So you're kind of up
Yeah.
against just this narrative that, you know, it's tricky.
Yeah. Can I ask, what made it so hard? Kind of going back to when you first became a stepmom, was there one thing or a couple of things that made it just really challenging, where you talked about when you were
Mm-hmm.
on the bathroom floor, crying, having that breakdown? What were some of the challenges there?
Mm-hmm. You feel like an outsider, right? You always feel like an outsider at the very beginning because you're trying to figure out your place, and they have their traditions and they have their, well, you're in my case, I was in their house. So they have their traditions and their way of doing things. You're basically living your life according to a custody agreement or a co-parenting plan that you didn't have anything to do with. So your schedule is already decided. Your holidays are already decided. You have all of that. And then you're kind of dealing with that co-parenting relationship with the ex. So you're like, where do I fit in here? Like, what is this role going to be?
Yeah.
And when am I going to not feel like an outsider? And I think for me, and, you know, I talk about this a lot, is not fighting that. Like, you are an outsider. You were coming in halfway through this book, right? You are the new character rolling in here. And instead of trying to pretend that you like got their beginnings or that you're not an outsider and trying to fight that, almost like embrace it, right? Yeah, like I'm new here, right? Show
Mm,
me around type deal. But I think that was the big thing. And then just, I think conflict, you know, we just went through times when, and, you know, the ex and I get along fine now, right? We can go back and forth with the kids. If she wasn't my husband's
yeah.
ex and we didn't have kind of all the stuff we had, I would have really, like, we could have been good friends, right? And there was just a lot of stuff that was going on. But just the lawyers stuff, that is very, when your partner is in court or they're going back and forth and there's legal bills, and, you know, a lawyer's like $300 $400 an hour. Why didn't we all become
Yeah.
lawyers? You know, it takes away from the life that you want. So, you know, there's times when I thought I was going to do a laundry room renovation. We were about to pull the plug, but then something came up and we needed that money for legal bills. Or you
Mm,
are getting these, you know, court documents, and that's not a fun experience either, right? Like, you just feel
yeah.
very like you don't have a lot of control. So that can be a really hard for stepmoms to navigate as well. Like, you're just really dealing with their past every single day in your present. And that's why it's really important to kind of do the work and work on strategies for communication and improving relationships and your personal growth and stuff. Because if you get caught up in all of that negativity and that spiral, like, it could be a very negative life. And that's not, no one deserves that.
Yeah. What advice do you have for a new stepmom, kind of going into that relationship? What's like your number one piece of advice there?
Oh, well, empathy. I would say empathy
Empathy.
for, I would literally sit down and be like, okay, what am I, first of all, name your insecurities and like, where are you at? Right. There was times where I was really judgmental of my stepkid's mom. And I look back and it was just because I was just so, I was so insecure. And so it almost feels better to look for someone else's, you know, flaws instead of kind of diving into how you're feeling. And like, I know we can all say, like, anytime we haven't been great to another person, it's more about us than it is about them. Right. And so
Right.
don't get caught up in the judgment, you know, the stepmoms judging the ex judging the stepmoms. Just really name your insecurities and like figure out where your triggers are coming from, and then just be empathetic. Like, grab a journal and be like, what is this like for her? What's her story here? I mean, because there's a really great book, it's called No One's a Bitch, or No One's the Bitch, and it's written by a mom and a stepmom. And they recall the time that they met, this like the first kind of interaction that they had, and they both experienced that in such a different way. One thought
Mm,
the other was being rude and standoffish, or like vice versa, right? And because we come into these experiences based on our own insecurities and our own fears, and that's how we're
yeah.
experiencing things too, right? So if we can be like, hey, what is this like for her to have this other woman come in looking after her kids, living in the house she lived in, like that would be very, very hard,
Yeah.
even if you didn't want to be with that guy at all, right? It's just, you have to, there's a lot of grief there. So I think empathy is so, so huge. And I think if everyone could just be a little bit more empathetic, even empathetic to your stepkids, like they're going back and forth. They have two homes. They're constantly out of a bag, even when they have stuff at both houses. Like just really being like, okay, like what's going on for everyone here? This is not easy on anyone.
Yeah. I love that. What about like boundaries for stepmoms? Maybe boundaries with, I guess we can do like boundaries with the stepkids, boundaries with your partner, and then boundaries with the ex. Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, boundaries is such a hot topic. I just posted about something on boundaries on my page, and someone just went off on me on about how like boundaries are actually like make co-parenting relationships so difficult because everyone has these boundaries and no one can communicate and blah blah blah. But I think we're really getting lost on boundaries, and sometimes boundaries, people use that word and it's actually them just trying to control another person. Right? So my boundary is you can't do this.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about you, but I've never been able to control another person. I can barely control myself. Right. So, for us to expect to set boundaries and control our people. But I think we need to find a way to set boundaries in a way that we feel like we can show up as our best. So your boundary would be, I'm sorry, I can't attend pickup and drop off with you, honey, because it provides me with so much anxiety, and I'm not going to participate in that situation because it A, B, and C. Right. So instead thinking about it like that, and instead of like a way to keep people out. Does that make sense? Like, I think sometimes we set these boundaries and say, you can't do this. I don't want you to do this. It's like, no, like, what do I need and how can I care for myself? So I think it's really, really individual.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's, you want to keep the bedroom kid free, right? And that's not because you don't want the kids in and out of the bedroom because you don't like them. It's because you need a safe place so that you can show up as your best self, so that you have that space.
Yeah.
That's a big one for stepmoms, is kids in the bedroom.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting. Like when Darren and I first got together, the kids were like,
that is interesting.
My gosh. Yeah. So when we first got together, when I was growing up, I was never allowed in my dad's room. I would sneak in, but we were never allowed in there. He had this like big change thing. So we would take money to go to Becker's and get treats. But, so Darren, I remember coming home, I had lived here for like a week or so, and I come home and my stepson's like laying on our bed watching TV. And I'm thinking, okay, why is he in here watching TV? We have 3 other areas he could be doing this. Right. And so I kind of said to Darren, like, the kids don't need to be like hanging out in our room. Like that needs to be our space. And he didn't like that at all. And I was like, that's a boundary for me. Like, I just need this to be kid free.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is now with our daughter, she's in our bed. Like she'll walk in and out of our bathrooms. And sometimes I'm like, do you not have your own space?
Yeah.
But it's very different. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. And that's again where stepmoms feel guilty, right? It's very different for me to just meet these kids a year ago or whatever, and then have them in my space all the time, as opposed to me, this is my daughter that I've parented since birth and like all of the things. And so there is a little bit of a different connection, but a lot of stepmoms struggle with that as the kids in the bedroom. Like they just need their own space. And I think it's really important for stepmoms to have their own space.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm trying to think back to when my dad was married, and I don't think that was a problem, but maybe it was, and I just didn't know. At the time, but because you don't know. They never said anything, and I kind of go in and out like freely of my parents, or not a lot. I wouldn't say a lot when I was growing up, but like it wasn't like an off limits room, I would say, unless they were sleeping or something like that. But that's so interesting. Okay. And then what about, I'm sure that like there's a lot of positive things about being a stepmom, right? It's not all challenging. It's not all hard. So let's talk about some of the things that are rewarding about being a stepmom.
Oh yeah. Like I think there's just so many things. I would say there's more things that are positive and rewarding than there have been challenging. But as humans, we tend to focus on the things that are tricky, right? It's just like parenting. There's a lot of things that are really hard. And then things that are great. But, I love, like, recently, so my stepdaughter turned 21, and recently we took her for her 21st birthday. We went to Nashville to celebrate. So my sister and I and her husband, and then we took her boyfriend, and we went, and it's so fun now that we can all hang out as adults, right? And so she can reflect back on, like, little things, and, like, she's looking back on everything from an adult perspective. That's why I'm always telling stepmoms to remember the long game, right? Like, these kids are going to remember things. Like, you're looking back and be like, oh, maybe I was not, so nice. And I definitely, like, I used to get rid of my dad's girlfriends for sport. I was a nightmare. Like, so, I can look back and see that now. But I think a lot of the fun family times, we do a lot of fun stuff together as a family, and those have always just been the best times. But I always remind stepmoms, like, I think we have this expectation, especially if you don't have kids, that you think like every moment of your family vacation is going to be amazing, or every moment of the fun activity is going to be amazing. Like, you go to the beach with your kids or whatever. A lot of it's stressful, and you're just trying to, like, navigate and all of that. And I think really paying attention to those special moments, like 2 minutes might be like picture perfect, and really, like, just really remember those, like, really tap into those, like, and that's true for all parenting. It's just, you got to live for those little moments, and a lot of the rest is kind of like mundane, just whoa.
Yeah. I was just going to say that's just like parenthood. That's just being a parent. And I can only imagine, especially you as a 26-year-old who has no kids, hasn't been married, coming into that, and you have 3.
Can we
just
talk
thrown
about that?
right
That
into
was
that.
insane.
And
That's
crazy. It's hard
baby.
enough when you have your own child. It's your own child that you birthed, and then you're like raising it gradually, right? That's even really hard. And but to not be the parent, come in, they're already, 5, 10 years old, whatever, and then having to be like the step parent to them and navigate what that looks like and try to make it as positive as possible. I mean, that's an uphill battle. And I mean, how long have you been married to your husband now?
So we've been together for 12 years. We've been married almost for 11 years in June.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, I went from 0 to 4 kids in like a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah.
So crazy.
Oh my gosh. And so your daughter how old is your daughter then?
She's going to turn 10 in May.
Oh, how fun.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, any last thoughts or tips that you have for stepmoms?
Yeah. I would just say, it sounds really corny, but, like, once you decide that you don't want to feel this way anymore, you don't want to struggle anymore, and you decide that you want to do the work on yourself. And that's the thing. You're sitting there waiting for the X to change. You're waiting for your partner to see it in this way, and, like, all these things. And you can't wait for that, because it's not going to happen. You have to change how you're showing up, and it'll affect how you're communicating. It'll affect your relationships. Like, you can tweak things. You can make changes in your step family dynamic, but it really, really does start with you and how you're showing up. So diving into that work on yourself first truly will change everything. My stressors are very much the same as they were when Darren and I first got together, in some way, shape, or form, right? Like, there's themes, and they don't rock me like they used to. I don't feel as consumed as I used to. You get better at dealing with it, but you have to decide that you're willing to do the work and to work on those strategies to get better. Because if you're just blaming everyone else and playing the victim and getting into that really negative narrative, just like anything in life, you're just going to hang out in the weeds, and you're going to be pissed off all the time and just triggered. And, like, life's too short for that. It can be a really beautiful experience. It's hard as hell sometimes, but it can be a really beautiful experience.
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for joining us on the podcast. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm at jamiescrimgeour.com. You can maybe spell it in the show notes for everyone. And I host the Kick-Ass Stepmom podcast. We release episodes every week. And then if you're interested in coaching or resources, or just looking for workshops on, like, disengaging, redefining your stepmom life and, like, all those things, I have tons of resources over on my website as well.
Awesome. Yes. And I'll link everything in the show notes. So thank you again, Jamie, for joining us on the podcast today.